Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about new Saga Season 1, Episode 6. Great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're immediately picking up where last episode left off in the battle between Kyle and Zentos. Obviously, it seems like they're relatively even matched, but the thing is, Zentos is still much more skilled than Kyle. Once again, whether that's a gap between the fact is that Kyle's current his mind from knowing all that he can and the tactics and what he wants to do with his body, whether his body can't really keep up with that or not. But at the end of the day, Zentos, I think, is just a better swordsman than he is. But it's like, Kyle also has the benefit of he knows Zentos' moves in and out, and it puts him at a massive advantage because Zentos doesn't know him at all. And so knowing thy enemy is, the biggest strategic advantage you can have in a fight. But like I said, for the most part, they see even kiltered enough. But it also helps that Kyle has a much stronger blade to the point Zentos' blade starts cracking. But like I said, he is still skilled enough to like knock Kyle's magic stone back at him. Like in that moment, Kyle thought he caught him off guard, threw the magic stone, and he swipes it and knocks it back at him. But it comes down to one final blow because it's like Kyle's just like, yeah, like can I ask you to surrender? He's like, if you really care that much about me, he's like, you would just sit back and let me die. But Kyle's like, yeah, sorry, can't do that. Too much is riding on the future of the world. And so it comes down to one final blow. And just, I think, before they clash is when we get the flashback. And this, at the time, it's indicative at the time, like when we hear that, like Zentos' words, because the irony being that, and I think I talked about the irony last episode where he's like, his job, his sole purpose was like his loyalty and sword belonged to his nation, specifically the royal family. And he's like, now that they're going, his sword belong, like only allegiance he has is to himself. That's the only person he serves. And so once again, it's like, I was like, that line is so indicative of, okay, so that kind of should have been the key sign about why he's doing what he's doing. Because it's like, right, your loyalty to the kingdom. So I'm like, is that why you're doing what our Carneus wants you to do? Because of that allegiance? It goes a little higher, but we'll get to that in a second. But during the clash, Kyle's blade gets knocked away, and before Zentos can deal the final blow, he strikes the stone and it completely shatters his blade. And before he could go in for the kill, Kyle has to put him down reluctantly, because he's like, right, there's people I want to protect, and Zentos was one of those people. So it's his biggest regret. He thought, like, now that I have this opportunity, maybe I can make sure that Zentos is. So it must mean, like, in his original timeline, he must not have survived because he wasn't there during the final battle, at least I don't think. So must have lost him at some point in a way. It's like, right, you were like a brother in arms to me. You trained me. You're the reason why I'm as skilled as I am. You put me on the path I was, and now I ironically have to use the skills you taught me to put you down. Because he probably had it in his head thinking, like, right, that's why he smiled when he first saw Zentos, because it's like, right, my brother is alive again. But now finding out, like, oh, you have to put him down because of this. That's why he was trying to talk him out of it. Like, every chance he got, it's like, please, like, surrender. I don't want you to have to die. You're one of many reasons, like, I want to keep you alive just like I want to keep everyone else alive because you are important to me, so. But even Zentos at the end there is kind of like, wow, you're a strange one. The fact is that, like, you have such sympathy for me. Because from Zentos' perspective, it's like, you don't really even know me, so why do you care? Someone like knows you more than you'll ever know. I was almost hoping that Kyle would tell him at the end, since he was going to die, like, the fact is we do know each other, but his final words is, I'm sorry, but we don't get to hear the rest of it. But Kyle certainly did, and so he's like, goodbye, like my brother in arms, farewell. And so obviously Melina meets up with, was it Kilrin and her unit, and they end up arresting Carneus. And to the point, she's like, even if you have to be rough with him after interrogating him, go ahead and do that. And you hear him kind of get, little beat up, because he's resisting, but like, oh, like, unhand me, you have no right to do this. So but they get invited to meet the king and everything, and they're going to get awarded. To the fact is, they get medals and everything, and we find out the royal spin that was put out there that basically the princess and the prince were out and about and on their way to the village when they got attacked, and some of the men died along with Captain Zentos, because you can't have the truth out there of like, oh, there was basically a coup happening. It's like that's going to throw things in turmoil and stuff. So it's like, the royal thing is to just keep that under wraps and just not cause unnecessary ruffling of feathers in the public zeitgeist when it comes to the kingdom and the rule. So that's kind of where word came about, and Kyle and the others are rewarded. And obviously, even I think it's Melina says it. I think it's Melina's voiceover that's like, "Oh, like this is Kyle's new saga as a hero." But then, like, there's going to be much more. There's all these different names. I think one of them was like the lecherous warrior, which just makes me think of Olivert from Trails. His nickname being one of his nicknames is the debaucherous prince. It's interesting because out of anyone, you would think Theron would be the lecherous one, but maybe it's in correlation with like, well, the two ladies in Kyle's life. Maybe that kind of has something to do with it. But like, you'd assume out of any lecherous warrior, it'd be Theron. But the twist I wasn't expecting is when we cut to the king later on panicking because he's the one that set Karnes and Zentos up. I was like, oh. And then, like I said, it makes so much sense with those key words of his sword and his loyalty was to the kingdom always. So it's like, who would like that? Because I was like, Karnes didn't seem like he was on running things. He didn't seem like that, like he was that bright. So it's like, right, he was just following someone else's game plan. And to find out the king's motivation too is, wow, that's twisted. His motivation was he wanted to put his son on to be his successor on the throne, because if Melina was on the throne, she'd far surpass him, and he'd just be, in the history books, he'd just be like, oh, relegated to Melina's father. So he had to get rid of his child because on the throne, she would do so much well, like their country would prosper under her well more than him, and he'd kind of be forgotten. He'd just be a footnote in the history books. I was like, that's such a petty reason to set this all in motion. And then we have Kyle, like, well, Kyle probably overheard some of that conversation, but he already knew what was what because he heard Zentos' final words, like, "I'm sorry, your majesty," and that pieced it together for him. It's like, Zentos is a noble warrior who only had loyalty to one thing. He'd only ever do anything if his king asked of him. That's who he was loyal to the most. Because Kyle already has beef with the king of Zergos, because it's like, he's like, I came to you asking you after the great invasion to help out the dwarves because they were in trouble, but you wanting to try and use this as a political maneuver to try and have political power over them, you waited. You were like, until they're actually in trouble, I won't send help. And because you withheld help, the dwarves got destroyed. And he's like, it didn't matter because like you were holding out for power, and it was all a moot point because eventually that was a domino that would eventually lead to Zergos' fall. So you're directly responsible in that regard. Your inactions, or rather your selfish need for power, set that in motion. Which even Kyle's like, I wasn't going to punish you for a choice that you made, or you have yet to make, and who's to say you would make it in this particular timeline, because maybe things will be different. Your daughter's around to maybe talk you into making the right choice. But it's like, no, like the fact is, knowing that you sent Zentos after the princess just for such a shallow reason, it's like your daughter, and he ends up talking about it later on, she may be like very crafty, but she's definitely a better leader than him. So he trusts in her more than he does Zentos, who only, not Zentos, sorry, the king, who only cares about his own self-preservation. So what does Kyle do? Kill him. I was like, hey, yo. That's the potential of future knowledge, but also like he didn't know that. He only knew that because of his fight with Zentos. So I wasn't expecting that. That's an interesting twist. Once again, he's willing to do whatever it takes for the future. It's like, I'm not, even if it might be horrendous, some of the stuff I've got to do. If it's for the greater good, I'll do it. So he kills the king. It gets relegated to just an accident. It's like one thing after another. The incident that led to Zentos' death, and then Kyle and them being heralded as heroes, and then finally this happening pretty back to back. because even Theron says like, oh, it's kind of a stroke of luck that the king held out, because the public spin is, rather than it being like, oh, he got drunk, slipped and died, we'll just say like he suddenly had like a heart condition, even though it's like, oh, he seemed healthy. But Theron's like, yeah, but it's kind of a good thing he held out, because if he didn't, we would have had to wait for the ceremony. So Kyle probably, he thought about this realistically, because he found the perfect time, because he, had to wait for the perfect time to wipe out the king, because like the longer they had to wait for the medals, like the longer it would have prolonged things. Plus it has a lot more weight to it, almost in a weird way, where it's like it coming from the king versus like Melina, who eventually would ultimately take the throne. You'd have to wait around, plus like it probably carries a little more weight to that it was the last thing that the king did, so it adds like something special about him awarding you the medal too. So I don't know if that's going to add to their legacy and notoriety as heroes. But once again, this is all for the purposes of putting them in a more better strategic position to use their position and status, or the honor associated with them, to help them in the long run when the great invasion eventually happens. Because it does make you wonder, does Melina know and she just doesn't tell anybody? Because she has a conversation with Kyle later on where she was like, essentially she was basically saying like she loved her father, but she felt like the feelings weren't reciprocated. So that implies like she knew like her relationship with her father was complicated, but I don't know if she knew it when she probably pieced it together, because she is pretty clever. So she probably figured her dad was responsible. And she's probably thinking, well, maybe my dad died because the guilt of what he attempted to do, like, overrode him. Or maybe it's like I don't know if she knows, or whether she's pieced it together that Kyle was the one responsible for that. Because she knows Kyle is a massive enigma. She's like, there's so much and you're trying to hide and pretend like it isn't, like there isn't more to it. But especially later on, because she asks, like, there's supposed to be some engagement set up between her and the Prince of Gargan. I'm forgetting his name now. But she wants to call off that engagement. In fact, she's sending Kyle to handle that. Because it also, Karen, I believe is the name of like a city-state that's kind of caught up in the middle of all of this. She has her reasonings for doing this and sending Kyle to do it. And he's like, I'm not quite sure, but Sidonia is the one that kind of pieced it out. Like, right, there's something interesting that the person connected, was it to Karen or Gargan? Like, the leader or whatever that place didn't show up, even though the person who's kind of overseeing everything, the king, suddenly dies. You don't show up, and then the princess's silence about some of this stuff seems like, right, this is her way to kind of test you, or her way of trusting you. So Kyle says, like, right, I might as well see this opportunity through, because it gets to meet the governor of Think of Karen, but also it benefits him because he's like, I need to put distance between me and the princess. He's like, the princess is so sharp. The last thing I want is her piecing together that I killed her dad. But also, like, she's asking a lot of good questions that I don't want to have to answer, because if I lie, she'll see through them. So it's like, right, I got to definitely keep my distance. So, even she had said to him, like, I know it seems very cold, like I didn't love my dad, that I'm not too sad about everything. It's like, she is. And once again, she loved her dad, but she knew it was complicated on his end, that there was a little more complications for his love for her. But either way, she asked Kyle, like, oh, you could be one of my royal guards. And he's like, oh, I've got stuff to do. She's like, I'm just kidding. The fact is that, I trust you when you say that if I ever need you, you'll come running. And her aide, was it Ninos is her name? Was like, I don't really trust that guy, that he kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, oh, you must feel nice to have Kyle, someone like him, wrapped around your finger. She's like, well, I don't think we're there yet. She's like, I feel like eventually down the road we might get to that point. I'm going to need to wrap him around my finger. But until then, he's willing to kind of cooperate. So it's a win-win without me having to force the subject or force my hand to manipulate him. But she's like, I do get this feeling like he is someone that I am going to want to keep by my side with what's coming. Once again, she doesn't know all the detail yet, but she's like, there's something there. So Kyle's kind of like, oh my god, was she just messing with me? But it's just further proof of just how manipulative she can be and how sly she is. So she's going to be someone they're going to have to keep an eye on in the future. But, having someone like that in play for what's to eventually come, that's what Kyle's also thinking. She's going to definitely be a lot more amendable and a lot more reasonable when it comes to the great invasion in the future, unlike her father, who just, once again, was all about self-preservation. So... but our quintet ends up, setting off the card. They end up, setting up their gear. The whole Theron looking for a new blade, but there's not one there. But the store owner was like, yeah, but you might be able to find one in Karen because it's kind of like a blacksmith type of, I think, well, I might be conflating it because I think Karen is the mining town, but maybe Gargan is the actual blacksmith. I don't remember. I might be have those flipped. But like the whole, because I think if Kyle was aware of something else, he probably would. Well, he probably doesn't want to say too much, but I wonder is Kyle familiar with something like eventually a blade that Theron does get? Because the one he's got right now, he kind of put it through its paces, and because he's had it for a long time. But the fact is they're focusing on getting him a special blade I'm like I said, I'm wondering, does Kyle have future knowledge of a blade that Theron will eventually find, and maybe they'll be able to find it way faster timeline-wise than maybe when Theron initially got it in the original timeline type of thing, so... But after, resetting everything, getting, some items and equipment, the group is on their way. So the closing of this chapter as they move on to the next step of their adventure. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.